I heard my own voice, played from a courtroom speaker. For 10 years, that voice had been buried under layers of silence. Now it echoed against marble walls, too loud, too clear, too alive to take back. The tape clicked. The sound filled the room, low, steady, hauntingly familiar. My words, once whispered in a studio at midnight, now rolled out like evidence. Justice speaks. Everyone turned toward me. I sat 2 rows from the bench in a gray suit that still smelled faintly of ironed linen and old fear. My hands trembled on the wooden rail, but my eyes stayed still. Across the aisle sat my ex-husband, Richard Cole, America's favorite defense attorney. Silver cufflinks, immaculate posture, the same half-smile he'd worn when he told me, years ago, "Let me do the talking, Marion." Beside him was our son, Ethan, 28. His tie looked too tight for the neck I used to kiss goodnight. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he finally heard what betrayal sounded like, because it had my voice. The judge's gavel cracked once, sharp as a gunshot. Wait. The courtroom fell into a hush thick enough to taste. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the air conditioner's mechanical breath, the faint rustle of paper as Richard's assistant slid him a note. Someone in the back whispered, "She really has the tape?" Yes, I had the tape. I'd carried it in my purse for 10 years, through relocations, funerals, and sleepless nights. It was the only thing I kept from the life that used to be ours. When the recording ended, silence returned, heavier than before. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "is this your voice on the record?" I nodded. "It is, Your Honor." Richard leaned forward, voice smooth as oil. "Your Honor, my client maintains that the recording was part of a company project, and Mrs. Daytree." Cole voluntarily. Voluntarily? I cut in, the word burning through my throat. I hadn't spoken that loud in years. Heads turned. The bailiff stiffened, unsure whether to silence me or listen. I stared at Richard, the man who had once promised to protect my name, and said, "You edited me out of my own life, Richard. But you forgot, I kept the raw file." His smile faltered for the first time. Ethan's pen rolled off the table and hit the floor, the small clatter slicing through the quiet. The judge lifted her hand. "Mrs. Cole, you'll have your chance to testify." "I've waited 10 years for that chance," I said softly. "I can wait another minute." Inside my chest, my heart beat like a metronome out of sync, steady, defiant. I smelled varnish, sweat, and the faint trace of the old cassette's magnetic dust. The air tasted metallic, like blood and memory mixed together. In the front row, a reporter scribbled something. I wondered what headline she'd choose. "Former attorney's wife brings voice to court." Catchy. But it wasn't the truth. The truth was simpler. 10 years ago, I lost everything. My marriage, my job, even the right to speak in my own house. I used to believe silence was noble, that endurance was strength. Now I know. Silence only teaches liars how to get comfortable. The bailiff gestured toward me. "Ma'am, please step to the stand." As I walked, the heels of my shoes clicked on the marble like a slow countdown. I placed my hand on the Bible, the same way I had placed it on a microphone long ago. Back then, I promised to record truth. Now, I promised to tell it. I looked at the judge, then at Richard. His eyes said, "Don't you dare." Mine said, "Watch me." The court stenographer's keys clacked as I began. I kept quiet, Your Honor, because I was told a woman's silence keeps peace. But peace built on theft is just another war, only quieter. A murmur rippled through the audience. Ethan shifted in his chair. I continued, my voice steadying with every word. He used my recordings, the ones I made for our home, our memories, to build his company's brand. Every commercial that said, "Justice speaks." That was me. My voice, my work, my trust. Richard's attorney started to object, but the judge raised a finger. "Let her finish." I exhaled, the years of quiet spilling out in one clean breath. I was silent for 10 years, not because I was weak. I was waiting until my voice was loud enough to echo through this courtroom. And there it was, the hook, The truth, the reason the entire room froze. 10 years of being unheard had turned into one moment of absolute clarity. I glanced at the microphone in front of me. For the first time in a decade, it was mine. 2013 feels like another lifetime, one where my hands still smelled of metal and coffee, and silence was just part of my job, not my sentence. Back then, I was an audio engineer at Channel 7, the local television station in Boston. I worked the graveyard shift, adjusting volume levels, cutting background noise, chasing clean sound in a world full of static. The control room was my church. Rows of blinking red lights, the hum of the mixer board, the quiet click of tape reels. Those were my prayers. I believed that if you listened hard enough, even chaos had a rhythm. Richard hated that shift. He said it made me look tired and unavailable. He'd come home from court at 7 p.m. in a $1,000 suit, toss his briefcase on the sofa and sigh, "Marian, when are you going to stop hiding behind those machines and start standing beside your husband?" At first I laughed. I thought he meant it kindly. Thought beside meant equal. It didn't. It meant behind. He was rising fast featured in magazines, winning impossible cases, the kind of man who spoke with his whole chest because he never had to doubt his voice would carry. I loved watching him talk. The way people leaned in, believing every word. It never crossed my mind that one day, he'd use that same voice to drown mine out. When Ethan was accepted into prep school, Richard asked me to quit the night shifts. "You've done enough, honey. Let me handle things from here." He kissed my forehead. It felt like a medal. Later, I realized it was a muzzle. I left Channel 7 on a Thursday. My coworkers gave me a coffee mug shaped like a microphone. It still sits in a box somewhere. That day, I walked out of the studio and straight into a silence I didn't yet understand. For the first few months, I told myself I was happy. I learned to make sourdough, to pack Richard's case files in perfect order, to smile when his clients called during dinner. He started planning to open his own law firm, Cole and Partners. The partners didn't exist yet. Only me. He needed capital and I had savings, 12 years worth of overtime pay and freelance gigs, $312,000 to be exact. I remember transferring it, the numbers glowing on the screen like they belonged to someone else. "It's for us," I said. "It's for the future," he replied. Funny how those two sentences aged so differently. That was the year I built him a home recording corner in the basement. He said he wanted to start a podcast about justice and law reform. I installed foam panels, a condenser mic, even a small reel-to-reel deck I'd saved from the station. He called it his sound lab. I called it ours. Sometimes at night, he'd ask me to record sample intros for him to get the tone right. I'd lean into the mic and say lines like, "Justice speaks not in courtrooms, but in conscience." He'd listen, grin, and say, "You've got a great voice, Mare." Oh, pure, so neutral. It makes people trust you. I didn't know he was already using those takes. That he was selling my sound to his brand consultant as the voice of integrity. Months later, I saw the first TV ad for his firm. Dark background, dramatic lighting, a gold logo, and then my voice. Justice speaks. It took me a full minute to recognize it. He had slowed it down slightly, polished it, added a reverb layer. But I knew the breathing pattern, the tiny inhale before the word speaks. It was like hearing a ghost pronounce its own name. "Who did your ad?" I asked him that night. He smiled. "A friend. He found a great voice actress." Then he poured himself another drink. I wanted to tell him it was me, that I knew every syllable of that sound. But something inside me froze. I thought, if I accuse him, he'll just say I'm jealous. Paranoid. Dramatic. So I stayed quiet. Silence felt safer than being dismissed. The commercial ran for months. Every evening at 7,000, right before the news. Neighbors called to say how powerful it was, how the voice gave them chills. Once, a woman at the grocery store said, "That ad makes me want to believe again." I smiled. I should have cried. Each time the ad aired, I'd stand by the living room door, pretending to fold laundry, listening to myself echo through the TV. Justice speaks. And every time, a piece of me disappeared into that sentence. I started collecting the recordings, every ad, every promo, every variation. I labeled the cassettes, proof A, B, C, though I didn't know what I was proving yet. Maybe I just wanted a record that I had once existed in sound. Richard's company took off. He started giving speeches about ethics, hosting gala dinners, shaking hands with judges who'd once ignored him. He'd come home with champagne bottles and say, "You should be proud, Marianne. None of this would have happened without you." He wasn't wrong. But it's strange, when a man says you made this possible, what he really means is stay invisible while I enjoy it. I tried to tell Ethan once when he was 16. We were in the car, stuck at a red light, the radio playing that same ad. I said quietly, "That's my voice, you know." He laughed, "Sure, Mum." Then he turned up the volume. That laugh replayed in my head for years. It was the sound of my credibility crumbling inside my own family. Sometimes, when Richard hosted guests, I'd walk past his study and hear him rehearsing. He'd play my recordings to train his interns, listen to how even her tone is. "That's how you sound convincing." He didn't even bother to change the file name. McColl.wave. My initials. My erasure. The reel-to-reel deck he used. My deck sat on his shelf like a trophy. Once, I reached out to touch it, to rewind one of the tapes, just to feel the smoothness of the spool. He caught me. "Don't mess with my equipment," he snapped. It was the first time he said mine instead of ours. I think that's when the marriage ended, though the paperwork came much later. After he left for work, I'd sneak into the basement and record again. My breath, the sound of the washing machine, the ticking of the old clock. Tiny reminders that I still had a frequency of my own. I kept the tapes in a shoebox, wrapped in aluminum foil to keep them from demagnetizing. The box lived under my bed, next to the ghosts of everything I didn't say. Years went by. Richard's firm became Cole Legal Group, then Cole International. He won awards. I stopped correcting people when they called me the lawyer's wife. It was easier to live as an echo. But every so often, when the TV blared his commercials, I'd catch that single line, "Justice speaks." And I'd whisper back, almost involuntarily, "Yes, but whose justice?" I used to think love meant not asking for credit. Now I know. Not asking for credit is the first step to being deleted. That realization didn't come like thunder. It came quietly, like feedback building in a microphone. Soft at first, then unbearable. And by the time you notice it, it's already too loud to ignore. That's when I started saving everything. The contracts, the checks, the files, the USB drives. Not for revenge, at least. Not then. I just wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. That I had once mattered in sound and in name. Back then, I didn't realize that every tape I labeled proof was a countdown. Each recording brought me closer to this day. The day my silence would finally break in court. Before courtrooms and contracts, there was sound. Pure, raw, unedited sound. When I was 23, I fell in love with it the way some people fall in love with God. Rain on a Tin Roof in July. That was my first hymn. I used to stand by the open window of the studio after everyone left, eyes closed, letting the rhythm of the drops sync with the hum of the mixing board. Each drop hit a different key. Together they made something whole. That's what drew me to audio work, the belief that honesty has its own pitch. If you listen hard enough, truth hums even under noise. I carried that belief like a religion into motherhood. When Ethan was 6, he'd sit beside me while I edited small radio projects for local artists. He loved the glowing sliders and the blinking red AI air light. His hands were too small to reach all the knobs, but his curiosity was huge. What's this button do?" He'd ask every 30 seconds. "It listens," I'd tell him. Everything good starts with listening. One Sunday afternoon, thunder cracked over the roof. He jumped. I laughed, showed him how to capture the storm's voice. We set a mic on the windowsill, wrapped the cable in a towel, and waited. When the first fat raindrops hit, the levels danced across the screen like tiny green hearts. Ethan gasped. "It's alive." "It is," I said. "That's the sound of the sky telling the truth." Later that night, when the storm faded, we played the recording back. The rain was softer, almost shy now, stitched with the faint thump of our heartbeat against the floor. I told him, "Every sound carries a secret. Even people. The trick is to find their frequency, the point where they stop pretending." He repeated the word frequency like it was magic. "Does the other one have one?" "Yes," I said, "and if you find it, you'll know who they really are." That moment, his wide eyes, the glow of the mixer lights, was one of those small eternities you don't realize you're storing for later. It was just a mother and her son, wrapped in cables and wonder. Years blurred after that. Ethan grew taller, his questions sharper, his laughter rarer. The studio turned into a storage room once Richard's firm took over our lives. But sometimes, when I walked past the closed door, I could almost hear the echo of that rain, the one we caught together. I never deleted that file. Rainfamily.wave. It sat quietly in a folder among invoices and case documents, a private heartbeat inside a hard drive full of lies. When Ethan left for college, I wanted to give him that recording. I thought maybe he'd remember the lesson, that every truth has a frequency, but he was in a hurry, late for a flight, already shaped by his father's cadence, confident, polished, untouchable. He kissed my cheek and said, "Love you, Mom. Don't worry about Dad, he's got everything handled." Then the taxi door shut, and his world drove away. After that, I stopped opening the window when it rained. The sound hurt too much. It reminded me of how naive I'd been to believe that truth alone could save us, that sound couldn't be stolen. Still, sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m., craving that old rhythm. I'd slip into the basement, put on the headphones, and play Rain Family. Wave. The room would fill with water I couldn't see. I'd hear my younger self laughing, Ethan's tiny gasp, and underneath it my own voice saying, "Every truth has its frequency." Me. It became my prayer again. I never imagined that same line. My foolish little philosophy would one day become literal evidence. That the frequency I taught my son to recognize would be the very key used to expose his father. Because when the experts analyzed Richard's commercial recordings, they didn't just hear words. They saw the waveform. The same pattern, the same breath gap, the same tiny hiss I'd once shown Ethan how to clean. My frequency. My truth. I sometimes wonder if he remembered that childhood storm when he saw the report. If he realized that the lesson he learned at 6, how to hear what's real, was the one that finally unmasked his own father. I never knew that a decade later, the frequency of truth I believed in would be the frequency that broke my family apart. I taught him how to listen. I just never imagined who he'd end up hearing. It started with something ordinary. Spring cleaning. One Sunday, in early 2015, I decided to clear the old external drives stacked beside the desk. They'd followed me through every move, heavy as bricks of the past. Most were filled with forgotten freelance projects, radio edits, demo reels, fragments of storms and laughter. The last drive had no label, just a thin layer of dust and a faint sticker that read, "Cole Media Backup." I plugged it in, expecting invoices or legal drafts. Instead, the screen blinked, and a folder opened. Projects, Justice Speaks. Inside were dozens of subfolders, advertisements, testimonials, promotional videos, each neatly dated, each with a note in Richard's assistant's handwriting, and approved for release. Clicked on one at random. A video played. Richard's face, his logo behind him, his voice delivering a sermon on ethics. And then, halfway through, came the tagline I knew too well, "Justice Speaks." Only this time, the sound had an odd echo, familiar yet hollow. My skin prickled. I opened the project file, traced the audio layers. There it was, a waveform labeled McColl. Wave. For a moment I froze. I hadn't used that naming format since my days at Channel 7. My initials. My signature. No one else would have known. I double-clicked the file. A chill crept down my spine as my own voice filled the room. Softer, slower, edited to sound detached. Justice Speaks. Then a faint reverb tail stretched unnaturally long. I could even hear the breath between syllables. The one flaw I never managed to cut out. He hadn't just used my old recording, he'd modified it, clipped it, polished it, made me sound like a ghost selling his truth. For a second, I thought I might be wrong. Maybe it only sounded like me. Maybe coincidence. But when you've lived with your own voice inside headphones for decades, you know its weight, its tremor, the exact millisecond where your lungs catch. I pressed pause. The room was dead quiet except for the soft buzz of the hard drive spinning. Outside, wind scraped across the window pane, a dry metallic hiss that matched the one on the tape. It felt like the house itself was whispering. You hear it, don't you? I copied the file onto a new folder labeled Proof Folder. Then I sat back, staring at the name. Muckhole. Wave like it was my own tombstone. That evening, when Ethan came by for dinner, I brought it up gently, over pasta. He was scrolling through his phone, half listening. Ethan, I said, keeping my tone light, I found something odd today. A file from your father's company, my voice, actually, on a project. He looked up, puzzled but not alarmed. Your voice? Yes, from an old recording, the one we did years ago. He smiled, that patient smile children reserve for aging parents. Mom, don't overthink it. Dad probably borrowed it for nostalgia. He always says your voice brings him luck. Borrowed? I asked quietly. Without asking? He shrugged. Your family. It's all the same team, right? I wanted to tell him that teams have rosters, credits, and contracts, that family shouldn't mean unpaid labor. But his eyes were already back on the phone, tapping messages I would never see. I nodded instead, pretending the pasta needed more salt. Inside, my chest tightened until even breathing felt like static. That night, I replayed the file again. Once. Twice. By the third time, I was no longer listening for my voice. I was listening for the moment I'd stopped owning it. I began noticing small things after that. The studio door downstairs was always slightly open when I came home. My old headset was missing once, then reappeared. A blank CD sat on the counter labeled only version Final 2, in handwriting too neat to be mine. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself this was what trust looked like, choosing not to question. But every time I heard his commercials on TV, my stomach twisted the same way it did when I first touched that file. Once, during a dinner party, a guest complimented the campaign. Whoever voiced that slogan, she said. What a beautiful tone, so honest. Richard smiled and raised his glass. We're lucky to have the best people in-house. I laughed too. It was easier than bleeding in public. That night, I sat in the dark living room long after everyone slept, headphones on, the laptop glow turning my reflection pale. I stared at the oscillating green bars of the audio software, as if they were a heartbeat monitor. Every wave that pulsed across the screen reminded me of something dying and being replayed. I didn't delete the file. Wave, and backed it up twice. Habit, maybe. Or survival. I wanted to confront him, but I couldn't find the words. How do you accuse someone of stealing something invisible? Something as abstract as sound, as sacred as voice? It would sound crazy, paranoid, petty. And Richard was a lawyer. He could turn even truth into fiction. So, I stayed quiet. I smiled at breakfast. I said goodnight politely, and I stored every copy of my silence into folders labeled neatly across my computer. Evidence disguised as housekeeping. I didn't know then that silence itself can stretch, tighten, compress. That every time you swallow a question, it records itself somewhere inside you, waiting to explode in feedback. Looking back, that was the moment the countdown began. Not when he lied, not when he edited the ad, but when I chose to mute myself and call it peace. I didn't realize it then, but from that day on, my silence was being compressed, like a sound wave pushed too hard against its limit, ready to burst into noise. Ready to break. The night the truth went public, I wore gray again, safe, invisible gray. It was Cole & Partners' 10-year anniversary gala, held in a ballroom glittering with glass and ego. Someone had strung white lights across the ceiling like artificial stars. Champagne bubbled. Cameras flashed. A jazz trio played something cheerful enough to sound like denial. The wispication. I hadn't wanted to go, Richard insisted. You're part of this, Marian. People still respect you. I wasn't sure which part he meant. The silent wife, the retired engineer, or the ghost who built his empire's soundscape. The air smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. I sat at a table near the back, a polite smile stapled to my face, clutching the small clutch bag that held my old recorder. An old habit, nothing more. Ethan was there too, sitting beside his father, proud, polished, everything I once dreamed he'd be. Yet when the lights dimmed, a hush swept through the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, a short film celebrating a decade of integrity and innovation. The first note hit before the screen even lit up, a tone I knew better than my own heartbeat. Low C sharp. My baseline, my breath. And then, over images of Richard shaking hands with judges and CEOs, my voice filled the ballroom. Justice speaks. The crowd applauded the sound. It wasn't just recognition. It was worship. I sat frozen, every muscle locked as my own words echoed back at me. Polished, processed, claimed. Then the credits rolled. Voice by Patricia Grant. I stared at the name. White letters against black, as if reading my own obituary. Patricia Grant, the 26-year-old assistant I'd seen bringing Richard coffee and laughing too easily at his jokes. I remembered once complimenting her earrings. She'd blushed and said, "Your husband picked them for me." Now she had my voice. Applause thundered. The jazz trio struck up again. Forks clinked, glasses toasted. Someone said, "That tagline gives me chills every time." I wanted to stand. To scream. To tear the cables from the projector and make them all hear what theft sounded like. Instead, I smiled. Because women like me are trained to smile through extinction. My pulse hammered in my ears until all I could hear was static. I reached for my bag to steady my hands and felt the zipper catch. The small tape reel I'd carried for years slipped free, hit the marble floor, and spun away under the table. It unwound as it rolled, the brown ribbon curling like spilled blood. I bent to grab it. No one noticed. They were too busy clapping for the man who'd just stolen the last thing I owned. My sound. When I straightened, Richard was on stage accepting a glass trophy shaped like a flame. He looked down at me as he spoke. "Justice isn't just a word," he said. "It's a voice that speaks for everyone." He paused, smiled. "Thank you, Patricia, for lending us yours." Laughter. Applause again. Ethan joined in. I felt the room tilt. My throat closed around air that refused to stay down. That single name? Patricia rang in my skull like feedback through broken speakers. I pressed my palm against my chest, half expecting to feel a hole where the sound had been ripped out. Someone leaned toward me. "Mrs. Cole, are you all right?" I nodded. I wasn't. The screen replayed short clips, each one my voice sliced and stretched. I could hear the microscopic edits. A shifted pitch here, a trimmed breath there. He'd rewritten me frequency by frequency until even I almost believed it wasn't mine. "Justice speaks," the ad repeated, louder now, triumphant. I thought of the basement studio where I'd recorded it years before, the rain outside, the way Richard had smiled as he hit record. I thought of Ethan, 6 years old, listening to thunder with me, learning to hear truth. And I thought of how far from that sound we had all drifted. Someone started chanting for an encore. The video looped. My own voice hit the room again like a slap I couldn't dodge. I whispered to no one. They stole my voice and then hired someone else to play righteousness. No one heard me over the applause. But I heard it. The tiniest crack in the wall I'd built around myself. A frequency rising. Unstoppable. Angry. I knelt, picked up the fallen tape. The ribbon was tangled, wrinkled, useless to anyone else. But I wound it carefully around my fingers like a lifeline. The metal reel was warm from the floor lights, as if it had absorbed the humiliation for me. When the ceremony ended, people rushed to congratulate Richard. He kissed my cheek for the cameras, his breath sweet with champagne. All about branding. I smiled for the flashbulbs. Inside, something final snapped. the soft click of a switch I hadn't touched in years. Later, in the restroom, I locked myself in a stall and unspooled the tape fully. The sound of it unwinding was almost beautiful, like rain against tin. I stared at the thin brown ribbon stretched across my lap and thought, so this is what erasure looks like. Light, delicate, impossible to rewind. When I stepped back into the corridor, music and laughter bled through the walls. But underneath it, faint and rising, I could still hear the last echo of my own line, stolen and renamed. Justice speaks. Only this time, I heard what no one else did. The tremor, the stolen breath, the proof. And I knew, with the clarity of a perfect tone, that the next time my voice played in public, it would be on my terms. They took my voice, then hired someone else to play the hero. But even an edited sound remembers its source. I drove home from the gala without turning on the radio. Silence was safer than hearing my own voice, pretending to believe in justice. Boston slept outside the windshield. Wet streets, red traffic lights bleeding through drizzle. Inside the car, I could still hear the applause looping in my head, the crowd clapping for a lie. Every beat of their hands landed like static on my skin. At 1 a.m., I unlocked the basement door. The air smelled of dust, solder, and the faint copper tang of old microphones. Nothing had changed since the days I used to work here. Same foam panels peeling from the walls, same wooden table scarred with cigarette burns. Only me. I had aged, the room hadn't. On the shelf sat the reel labeled, Justice Speaks, Original. The handwriting was mine, still careful, still hopeful. I brushed the dust away and threaded the tape onto the deck. When I hit play, the machine whirred alive like a heart restarting after years of coma. Justice speaks, the voice said, soft, steady, naive, my voice. Younger, lighter, still believing that truth automatically wins if you record it clearly enough. I stood there listening, my fingers trembling over the console. Every hiss, every breath, every small imperfection was a fingerprint of the woman I used to be. I laughed quietly, bitterly. I taught so many people how to clean background noise, I whispered. So how did I let my own life drown in it? The tape clicked as it looped. Somewhere upstairs, the refrigerator hummed, a flat, even frequency. I'd spent decades training my ear to find patterns. Now all I could hear was distortion. I rewound the reel and pressed record. The red light blinked on, bleeding through the darkness. For a second I just stared at it, mesmerized. That tiny red dot had once meant beginning. Tonight it meant war. I leaned toward the microphone, voice shaking but alive. This time, I said slowly, each word deliberate, justice really speaks. No music, no echo, no polish, just breath and defiance. When I stopped, the silence felt different. Not empty-charged. Like a room holding its breath before thunder. I sat down at the old desk, pulled a notebook closer, and began to write. To Lena Morales, Boston Tribune, Audio Investigations. We hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years. Back then, she'd been the rookie I mentored on her first studio shift, curious, reckless, hungry for truth. Now she ran the investigative audio desk, exposing doctored recordings and political scandals. I wrote, Lena, I think my voice has been stolen. Literally. I have proof, if you can still tell distortion from design. I attached the audio clip, the one labeled McCall. Wave. And my newly recorded file. Play. I hesitated over send. My finger hovered above the key like a diver over cold water. For 10 years I'd been quiet. 10 years of choosing peace over truth, invisibility over conflict. What if speaking now shattered the last thread holding Ethan to me? What if Richard buried me legally, financially, publicly? The cursor blinked, waiting. Then I remembered the gala. The name Patricia Grant glowing on the screen while my voice carried her credit. The sound of my own words clapping for a stranger. And the way Ethan had looked proud instead of horrified. I pressed send. The whir of the old computer filled the room, a small metallic sigh that sounded almost human. Message sent. I leaned back and exhaled for the first time that night. The red light on the recorder still glowed. I hadn't noticed it was still running. My confession. Every breath of it was now recorded too. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the basement window like fingers asking to be let in. It sounded exactly like the storm Ethan and I had once captured years ago. Back then, we'd called it the sound of honesty. Now it was a warning. I unthreaded the new tape and labeled it Proof Zero. Then I placed it beside the original reel in a small metal box and locked it. For the first time, I wasn't collecting memories. I was collecting ammunition. Upstairs, the digital clock blinked 3:12 a.m. I poured a glass of water, hands still shaking. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I barely recognized myself. Hair silvered, eyes steady, jaw set. Not the woman who waited for permission to speak, but the one who'd finally learned the language of evidence. I went back downstairs once more, checked that the recorder light was off, and sat for a long time in the hum of the machines. There's a peculiar stillness after you choose truth. Like the world holds its breath to see if you'll regret it. I didn't. For the first time in years, the silence around me wasn't heavy. It was listening. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a glass or make a scene. I simply pressed record again. And that tiny motion, the weight of a fingertip on a red button, felt louder than any shout I could have made. For 3 days, I heard nothing. No reply from Lena. No call from Richard. Only the soft, predictable sounds of a house holding its breath. The refrigerator hum, the tick of the clock, the faint whisper of rain against glass. Then, on the 4th morning, an envelope slid through the mail slot. Cream paper. No return address. Inside, a letter, typed in the cold precision of legal font. Mrs. Cole, any attempt to release or distribute proprietary material belonging to Cole and Partners will result in immediate legal action. Consider this your formal warning. R. Cole. There was no greeting. No dear Marion. Just a threat wrapped in manners. I folded the paper neatly, placed it on the table beside my coffee cup, and stared at it until the words blurred into black lines. After 10 years of silence, this was the first time he'd written to me directly. And it wasn't a letter of love or apology. It was a muzzle, disguised as professionalism. I took another sip of coffee. It tasted like iron. That evening, Ethan called. Just one sentence. Clipped, awkward. Dad says you're overreacting. I waited. No apology. Yet question. Just that. When I didn't answer, he sighed. Mom, please don't make this ugly. Ugly. That's what people call truth when it stops serving them. I wanted to remind him of the storm recording, of how he used to listen for the hidden frequency behind every sound. But I realized he no longer heard it. He'd been tuned to his father's wavelength for too long. So I said nothing. He hung up, the line ending with that dull digital click that feels like a door closing. The house went quiet again. Too quiet. It's strange how noise becomes a companion when words disappear. I began to notice the smallest things. The air vents sighing, the fridge cycling on, the faint echo of my own heartbeat when I held my breath. Every night, I went down to the basement and turned on the microphone. Not to record words, just silence. Silence has texture if you listen hard enough. Some nights it was soft, cotton-like, full of air. Other nights it was heavy, thick, almost metallic. The kind of silence that warns before a storm. I'd sit there, headphones on, eyes closed, counting seconds between sounds. To anyone else, it would have looked like waiting. But I was measuring something. The pulse of truth, the rhythm of fear. Sometimes I caught faint noises from the upstairs hallway. A creak, a shift, maybe just the house settling. Other times, I thought I heard a car idling outside longer than it should. I never checked. When people threaten to silence you, they also teach you to hear ghosts. I started labeling my recordings by mood. Quiet 1, quiet 2, morning tone. Not for anyone else, just for me. Each file a way to mark time, to prove I was still here, still listening. At 2 a.m. on the 5th night, an email arrived. Subject, he's bluffing. It was from Lena. Just 2 words, and then a link to a secure upload folder. Below it, send everything. I'll verify it myself. I stared at the screen, pulse steady, not excited. Resolved. The fear didn't vanish, it simply rearranged itself into focus. I attached the files. The original. Justice Speaks. The doctored M. Cole. Wave. And my new recording. Before hitting send, I whispered into the mic, "For the record." Then I clicked. After that, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching dawn crawl across the street. When the first light hit the kitchen clock, I realized how loud it had become. Every tick landed like a heartbeat, a countdown. I thought of Richard's letter again, of how confident he was that threats could still control me. He didn't understand. Silence was his language, not mine anymore. Mine was evidence. The phone buzzed once more. Ethan again. I didn't answer. Let him sit in the quiet too. By afternoon, I'd cleaned the whole basement. Wires coiled, reels stacked, surfaces wiped. Preparation disguised as routine. When fear can't be escaped, you organize it. That night, I pressed record again. But this time, instead of silence, I read the letter aloud. Every word, slowly, evenly, like an oath. When I finished, I let the tape run a full minute longer. All that filled it was the clock. Tick, 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 a perfect metronome for the days ahead. I didn't send that file anywhere. I just labeled it threat logged, wave, and locked it away. By the end of the week, the house no longer felt empty. It felt armed. Sometimes, courage doesn't sound like a battle cry. It sounds like the quiet hum of a woman who refuses to unplug her microphone. There are wars that begin in noise, and there are others that start in silence. Plan. Mine was the latter, but when it breaks, its echo will last a lifetime. The summons came on firm letterhead. Meeting requested. Cole and Partners. Monday, 10 a.m. No subject line, no explanation. Just a location I knew too well. The office I'd helped fund into existence. I almost didn't go. But curiosity, or maybe pride, drove me downtown through the gray Boston wind. The city smelled of wet asphalt and ambition. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, clutching my recorder in my bag like a talisman. The glass tower loomed above me, 12 floors of power polished to a mirror shine. My reflection looked small in it, ghost, thin. At the front desk, the young receptionist smiled with professional pity. "Mrs. Cole? They're expecting you." The elevator doors slid shut, sealing me inside a vertical silence broken only by the hum of machinery. When they opened on the top floor, I stepped into the world I'd built for him. Mahogany, marble, and money. The firm's logo, my slogan, gleamed on the wall. Justice Speaks. Richard stood behind his desk, perfectly composed, silver hair immaculate. Across from him sat a young woman in a navy suit, his new associate, and, apparently, his weapon. "Marion?" he said smoothly, as if greeting a client, not a ghost from his past. "Thank you for coming." I didn't answer. The air smelled of leather and citrus polish, his chosen scent of authority. My heels clicked on the floor like metronome beats counting down to impact. "Please," he gestured to a chair. "Sit. Let's talk like adults." I stayed standing. The young associate introduced herself. "Caitlin Reed, legal counsel for internal resolution." She slid a folder across the table. "Mrs. Cole," she said softly, "this document will prevent a very unfortunate misunderstanding from becoming public. It confirms that all audio assets produced during your marriage are shared intellectual property of Cole and Partners. In exchange, you'll receive a financial settlement." Her voice was syrup over steel. "A contract. 2 pages of erasure dressed as courtesy. At the bottom, a blank line waiting for my signature. And the number beside it, 250,000. The price of silence, calculated to the cent." Richard leaned forward. Marion, be reasonable. You need money, not credit. Sign it, and we can all move on." I looked at him. "Money? Not credit?" He smiled. "You were always emotional about recognition. But recognition doesn't pay for retirement homes." For a heartbeat, the room tilted. Then I heard it. the faint whir of a recorder from somewhere behind the half-closed door. The firm was documenting its own conversation. Legal habit. Insurance. I breathed evenly, letting the sound steady me. He thought the microphone belonged to him. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't need fame." "Good." Exhaled, relieved. "But I need something you can't buy." I met his eyes. "I need my voice back." The sentence landed like a crack of static. Caitlin blinked. Richard's smile faltered. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Marian, please, don't romanticize this. You recorded a few demo lines years ago. I built an empire around them. Be proud of that." "Proud?" I echoed. "Of being the ghost in your commercials?" His jaw tightened. "You're making this emotional again." I stepped closer to the desk, resting my fingertips on the cold wood. "You stole my sound, Richard. You edited me into someone else's virtue. And now you're asking me to erase myself officially?" He shrugged. "Everyone borrows. You taught me that." "No," I said. "I taught you to listen. You just never learned what truth sounds like." Caitlin shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should?" Richard cut her off. "Stay, Caitlin. She needs to hear this." He turned back to me, voice dropping into that courtroom register that once made juries melt. "Marian, this obsession will ruin you. No one cares whose voice it is. The firm is bigger than a soundbite. Bigger than you." I almost laughed. "That's what you never understood. Empires. They also bring them down." His nostrils flared. "You're threatening me now?" "No," I said. "I'm reminding you that every empire forgets its echo." For a long moment, silence thickened, dense, humming. Outside the office, a phone rang, muffled. Inside, only the clock ticked. Steady, defiant. He pushed the contract toward me again. "Sign, and we'll both sleep tonight." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I wrote. Not my signature, but a single sentence across the page. "This document is invalid until justice truly speaks." Then I set the pen down. Caitlin's breath caught. "Mrs. Cole." I looked at her gently. "You're recording this meeting, aren't you?" Her eyes widened. "It's standard practice, ma'am, for internal." Richard cut in. "That file is confidential." I smiled. "Then you won't mind if we listen to it?" He started to object, but I was already reaching for my bag. I pulled out my small recorder, the one I'd brought for protection, and placed it on the desk beside theirs. Two red lights glowed side by side, twins in truth. "Funny," I said, "how both of us came prepared." The tension snapped like a string too tight. Richard slammed his palm on the desk. "You can't use that." "You can't use that?" "Why not?" I asked. "You used mine for a decade." The air changed, thick, electric, filled with invisible sound waves of anger. I could almost hear the distortion rising in him, the way I used to hear feedback before a speaker burst. He lowered his voice. "You think you can blackmail me?" "No," I said. "I think I can finally correct the record." Behind the door, footsteps paused. A young tech, probably the intern managing the firm's recording logs, was listening. The hum of his recorder grew louder, feedback bleeding through the vent. He didn't mean to broadcast it, but he did. Our conversation echoed faintly through the hallway speakers connected to the firm's internal audio line. "You stole my voice." "Oh," I said again, louder now. "I made it famous," he shot back. The words bounced off the walls, off glass and marble, carried through corridors like confessions. Secretary stopped typing. Phone stopped ringing. Richard realized it a second too late. He lunged for the intercom switch, killing the feed, but the damage was done. People had heard. The firm that branded itself On Justice Speaks had just heard its founder silencing the woman behind the phrase. Caitlin's face had gone pale. "Mr. Cole, the system auto-backs up every file to cloud storage." He turned on her. "Delete it." She shook her head. I can't." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I gathered my bag, tucking the recorder inside. "Don't worry," I said softly. "You won't have to delete it. I already saved a copy. His voice dropped to a growl. You're destroying everything we built. No, Richard, I said. You did that the day you called theft a partnership. For a second, his expression cracked. Something like fear flickered behind the practiced arrogance. I stepped back, hand on the door handle. The hallway beyond was full of silent faces pretending not to have heard, but every pair of eyes told me they had. At the threshold, I turned once more. You always believed microphones worked for you, I said. But they don't choose sides. They only capture what's real. I nodded toward the desk, where his own recorder still blinked red. This time, Richard, your microphones betrayed you. And with that, I walked out past the stunned intern clutching his headset, past the wall that read Justice Speaks, past the empire built on my breath. In the elevator, I finally exhaled. The sound bounced off the steel walls, small but certain, a quiet that felt like victory. Below me, the tower's lights flickered as the office scrambled to contain what it couldn't. I looked at my reflection in the mirrored door, a woman no longer erased. For years, I'd been the background noise. Now, I was the feedback they couldn't mute. This time, the microphone didn't belong to them. It belonged to the truth. Within a week, the air around me changed. Not the weather, the temperature of reputation. At first it was small things. The mailman stopped leaving letters at the door, slipping them through the slot instead. The neighbor I used to exchange garden tools with suddenly had urgent errands whenever I waved. Even the grocery cashier, who once asked about my recordings, now smiled too brightly and looked through me. Then came the articles. Local woman claims law firm stole her voice. Family concerned for mental health. Estranged ex. Wife launches baseless attack on justice icon. Each headline colder than the last. The quotes were fabricated, the tone surgical. They called me unwell, fixated, lonely. I could recognize his fingerprints in every line. Richard had always known how to weaponize language. He didn't need to disprove me. He only had to discredit me. Lena tried to warn me. He's planting stories faster than I can flag them, she said over the phone. Anonymous tips, paid content farms, forum posts. He's painting you as unstable before we publish anything. I laughed, but it wasn't humor. He's always been good at rewriting narratives. He just upgraded from courtrooms to clickbait. Then the calls stopped coming altogether. A local podcast that once promised to interview me withdrew with a polite email. Due to concerns regarding the veracity of claims, we'll be postponing indefinitely. Postponing indefinitely. Corporate language for, we believe him, not you. That night, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the hum of distant traffic. My house felt smaller than ever. A pocket of static cut off from the world. In the darkness, I whispered to no one. He stole my voice once. Now he's stealing my sanity. But even lies have a frequency, and his were starting to echo too perfectly. 3 days later, a knock broke the silence. When I opened the door, a woman stood there holding a tablet and a paper cup of coffee. Early 30s, rain in her hair, eyes sharp and kind. Mrs. Cole? She asked. It's been a while. I blinked. The voice tugged at memory. Do I know you? She smiled. You taught me compression techniques at Channel 7? Audio class of 2010. Ava Martinez. I remembered then. The intern who stayed late after every shift, who once asked if sound could tell truth better than people could. She'd gone on to work in tech, something about acoustic intelligence. What are you doing here, Ava? I asked. She held up her tablet. Lena sent me. She said you might need a different kind of proof. We worked in the basement, the same one where my life had first been hijacked. The old analog deck sat beside her sleek laptop, a time capsule meeting its descendant. Ava plugged in cables, her fingers moving fast. The problem, she said, is that audio is easy to manipulate, but it leaves fingerprints. Frequency irregularities, micro-timing. New AI tools can detect those patterns. She paused, glancing at me. You said your husband used your recording. If we compare the waveform of your original with his broadcast, the system can verify whether it's the same voice, even if he changed pitch or tone. Will it hold up legally? I asked. She shrugged. If it's science, it's truth. Law will have to catch up. Her confidence steadied me. I handed her the tapes, the originals, the commercials, and my newest recording labeled Proof Zero. Ava placed small sensors on the reels, the laptop humming as it began analysis, the screen filled with blue lines, sound visualized, truth translated into light. We watched in silence as data scrolled by. I caught the faint reflection of those waves on the wall, flickering like underwater light. For a moment, I forgot the headlines, the shame, the isolation. For a moment, there was only the music of evidence. After 20 minutes, Ava leaned forward. There, she said, pointing. Look at this band, around 235 Hz. It's unique to your vocal resonance. Even if someone clones or alters your recording, that pattern stays. It's like a fingerprint. On the second graph, Richard's commercial. The same band pulsed in identical rhythm. 99.98% match, she murmured. Then she smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. Mrs. Cole, this is irrefutable. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry, but tears felt too small for the scale of vindication. Instead, I reached out and traced the glowing lines with one finger. There it was. Proof not written in words, but sung in frequencies. The voice he claimed as his invention had remembered me, even after being twisted and renamed. Can you export it? I asked. Ava nodded. With metadata, timestamps, and AI verification certificate. We'll make it bulletproof. I laughed softly. He spent his life exploiting technology for manipulation, and now technology is the one thing he can't silence. She looked up from the screen. That's poetic justice. Oh, I said quietly. Ritual justice. The smear campaign intensified after that. Anonymous accounts flooded social media, accusing me of jealousy, of aging bitterness, even of forging the audio. Someone leaked an old hospital record from when I'd fainted during menopause. Proof of mental instability. Every time a lie surfaced, Ava countered it with data. She uploaded spectrogram comparisons to secure platforms, tagging journalists who still had integrity. The truth began to hum louder than the noise, but isolation leaves residue. I'd step outside and still feel eyes watching from curtained windows. Once, someone sprayed the word LIAR on my fence in red paint. I didn't erase it. I just hung a small speaker nearby and played my original tape on loop at low volume. Justice speaks. Let them hear it straight from me. Lena called one night, voice half laughter, half disbelief. You're trending. People are asking if AI can really prove a stolen voice. Richard's PR team is panicking. I smiled into the dark. He taught the world that justice speaks. I'm just teaching it that justice listens. Ava came by again with an upgraded analysis. Color-coded spectrograms, precise to microseconds. The commercials all source back to your baseline file, she said, scrolling through graphs. He didn't even re-record, just layered filters to disguise your timbre. Rookie mistake. I raised an eyebrow. You sound disappointed. He grinned. A little. I expected a better villain. We laughed, and for the first time in months it didn't feel forced. The laughter echoed through the basement, bouncing off the foam panels I'd glued decades ago. It sounded like music finally coming home. When she left that evening, I stayed behind and played the clip again. My original and his edited one side by side. At first, they blended perfectly. Then I muted his track and kept mine running. The difference was indescribable. Like breathing fresh air after years of recycled oxygen. My voice didn't sound young anymore, but it sounded mine. The next morning, a new headline appeared. Expert confirms. Audio, used by Cole and partners, originated from former wife's private recordings. Lena's article. Front page. The story spread faster than Richard's lies ever could. Every outlet that had mocked me now quoted AI verification evidence. I didn't call to gloat. I didn't need to. By afternoon, reporters camped outside his firm. Clients began demanding explanations. Cole and partners went offline for system maintenance. I sat by the window, drinking tea, listening to the city hum. The frequency of scandal shifting direction. The phone rang. Richard's number. I let it ring out. He called again. And again. Finally, I picked up. Marion. His voice cracked for the first time in years. "Can we talk privately?" "We are," I said. "And for once, every word is recorded. By your own system, by mine, by the world." He exhaled sharply. "You think this makes you a hero?" "No," I answered. "It just makes me audible." Then I hung up. Later that night, I went downstairs one last time. The machines hummed softly, the same sound that had once kept me company through sleepless nights. I placed my hand on the old reel deck. Its metal was warm under my palm, alive with memory. I thought about everything I'd lost. My marriage, my reputation, my peace, and realized that maybe this was the only way it could have happened. Truth isn't kind, it's corrective. I powered up the laptop and opened Ava's final report. On the screen, my voice's fingerprint pulsed in blue light. Next to it, a digital certificate stamped. Authentic. Origin verified. I smiled. "Technology took my job once," I whispered. "Now it's giving me back my name." And as I saved the file, the hum of the machine rose behind me. Low, steady, pure. A sound I hadn't heard in years. The sound of dignity coming back on air. Ava arrived 2 mornings later, carrying a manila folder thick with printouts. She set it on my kitchen table like evidence dropped into a courtroom. "I wanted you to see this on paper," she said. "Screenshots don't have the same weight." I pulled the folder closer. The smell of fresh ink rose like ozone before lightning. Inside were graphs, blue and green spectrograms stacked like layered fingerprints. At first glance, they were just beautiful patterns, like music frozen mid-flight. But the captions underneath made my stomach turn. Source A. Original Justice Speaks. Recorded by Marion Cole, 2012. Source B. Cole and Partners TV Commercial, 2015. Match, 99.98% resonance. Pitch shifted up 2%. Ava pointed to the highlighted area on the second graph. "You see this band here, around 235 Hz? That's you. Even if someone changes the pitch or filters the sound, the resonance remains. Think of it as your vocal DNA." I traced the band with a shaking finger. It felt like touching my own scar. "They only shifted it?" I whispered. 2%, Ava said. "That's all. Enough to fool a casual ear. Enough to make you doubt yourself. 2%. 2 notes on a scale. 10 years of silence built on a microscopic lie." I stared at the printout, the paper trembling in my hands. The numbers blurred into waves. For a moment I couldn't breathe. 10 years, I murmured. They just raised me 2 notes, so I wouldn't recognize myself. The words hung in the kitchen like a confession. Ava looked at me with something like pity, Hughes. "They underestimated you. They didn't count on the fact that an audio engineer knows her own breath pattern better than her own face." I almost smiled. Almost. In another sleeve of the folder lay something even more damning. An internal memo Lena had pulled from a whistleblower. Subject: Asset Repurposing Plan. It listed every file name, every date Richard's team had used my recordings for new campaigns, and a timeline of when they started attributing it to Patricia Grant. Below, a note in Richard's own hand: "Keep pitch shift consistent. She'll never notice." The audacity of it. Like reading a blueprint for erasure. I felt the old anger rise, not as a shout, but as a pressure, like feedback building just before a speaker blows. I closed the folder slowly, palms flat on the table to steady myself. The kitchen clock ticked, louder than usual. Outside, a bus groaned past, its brakes squealing on the same 2 notes they'd stolen from me. Ava sat quietly, giving me space. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, but clear. "It's not that I was mute. They just detuned me until I couldn't hear myself." Ava nodded. "We'll retune you." I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. at the houses where neighbors once waved, at the fence still marked LIA. The smear campaign had made me a ghost. But ghosts, I realized, have one advantage. They can slip through walls. I turned back to Ava, a new steadiness settling over me like armor. They wanted me to disappear in the noise, I said. Instead, they've given me a signal no one can ignore. She slid a flash drive across the table. All the files, with verification. Metadata's bulletproof. If we publish, there's no walking it back. I picked it up, feeling its weight. Absurdly light for something that could collapse an empire. No, I said softly, I'm not publishing yet. Not until I know every layer of what he's done. Amos Ave asks, You think there's more? I nodded. A man who hides theft this carefully isn't planning to stop. He's planning an exit. In my gut, a certainty formed. That Richard wasn't just defending his brand, he was preparing to cash out before the scandal reached him. Selling the firm, erasing me a final time. I opened the folder again, letting my finger rest on the 2% shift, the 2-note betrayal. My voice, doctored but not destroyed, stared back at me. I whispered, more to myself than to Ava. I'm not mute, they just tuned me off key. Then louder, with a steadiness that surprised me, but I can tune myself back. Ava smiled faintly. Then let's do it. I looked at the flash drive, at the folder, at the small pile of truth we'd built out of frequencies and persistence. 10 years reduced to data. 10 years ready to explode. Somewhere in the house, my old tape deck clicked as if agreeing. Outside, a wind picked up, rattling the window panes, sounding almost like applause. I closed the folder and pressed my palm flat against it. For the first time, the paper didn't feel like proof of victimhood. It felt like a weapon, not silent, just shifted. Data ready to shift back. The next few days moved with the precision of editing. Cut, align, render. No emotion, just process. Lena and Ava came every afternoon, their laptops open, cables crisscrossing my old wooden desk. Coffee cups, sticky notes, waveforms. My kitchen turned into a newsroom disguised as a recording studio. Every time a file loaded, a small blue bar crept across the screen, marking progress like a pulse returning to life. We were building something bulletproof, an archive that could outlive all of us. Lena handled the legal phrasing. Ava managed the tech verification. And me? I handled the sound. The old reel labeled, Justice Speaks. Original sat in the center of the table inside a glass display box I'd bought from a thrift store. I told them it wasn't for drama. It was for protection. Glass holds shape, I said. And light. This time, no one gets to splice it unseen. They understood. When we weren't talking, we were listening. Rewinding, trimming, syncing each second of proof. Outside, the world still thought I was unstable. Inside this room, I was finally in control of every frequency. That evening, when the others left, I stayed behind. The house was silent except for the low hum of the computer fan and the faint creak of wood expanding under the night chill. I turned off the lights, keeping only the desk lamp. The warm circle of light fell over the microphone, my notes, and the glass box. For a moment, I just sat there, palms flat on the table, feeling the vibration of the machines. There's a strange peace that comes when you realize fear has nowhere left to hide. Then I reached for the headphones, the same pair I'd used 20 years ago. The ear cushions had cracked with time, but when I slipped them on, the world shrank into focus. Every breath sounded closer, cleaner. I pressed record. The red light blinked once. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass cover of the reel. I spoke slowly, evenly, as if dictating history instead of hurt. My name is Marian Cole. This is my statement, recorded on the original device used for the campaign known as Justice Speaks. I am the owner of this voice. No consent was given for its commercial use. The words came steady, measured, no tremor, no anger. Just truth, documented. I paused, letting the silence between sentences breathe. Old habit, always leave room for editing. Then I smiled. But this time, there will be no edits. I continued. This recording and every attached file will remain unaltered. It will be shared publicly in its entirety, with waveform analysis attached. Oh, this is not revenge. Oh, this is reclamation. When I finished, I stopped the recording, then immediately played it back, hearing my own voice through the headphones. Clear, unfiltered, felt like standing in front of a mirror after years in the dark. Older, lower in tone, but alive. I saved the file as testimony final. Wave. No version numbers this time. Then I labeled a folder, The Truth Project. Inside it, I placed every verified recording, each spectrogram, the whistleblower memo, and my signed statement. Ava would handle encryption in the morning. Lena would upload the files to secure servers. All I had to do was seal the glass box. I lifted the reel with both hands. Its weight surprised me, heavier than I remembered, like it had absorbed the years of silence. I placed it carefully inside the glass box, coiled the tape neatly, and closed the lid with a soft click. The light caught it perfectly, the ribbon inside glinting like a strip of captured sunlight. A line came to me, something I'd said to Ethan years ago when he first learned how to record rain. Every sound you save changes shape over time, I told him. But the moment you protect it, it becomes history. Now I understood what that meant. I pressed my palm to the glass. This time, I whispered, no one gets to tune me out. Then I switched off the lamp and sat in the dark. Through the headphones, the playback of my statement ran again, my voice steady and human. Not perfect, never again perfect, but undeniably mine. Outside, a storm was gathering, soft thunder rolling somewhere beyond the city. The same kind of storm that once taught me to love sound. I smiled. Fitting. When the final echo faded, I took off the headphones, set them down gently, and stood. There was no fear left in the room. Only readiness. I'm not afraid of my voice anymore, I said to the empty air. Because it's finally speaking on my side. The courthouse smelled of wet stone and nervous paper. Rain streaked the high windows like gray veins. I walked up the marble steps, recorder and glass box in my arms, each step a metronome counting down to the truth. Inside, the courtroom buzzed, reporters filling every bench, cameras perched like vultures. Cole and partners had spent weeks smearing me. Now they'd called my bluff, confident the spectacle would finish me off. Richard sat at the defense table in his best navy suit, silver hair immaculate, his face a calm mask. Beside him, a team of attorneys shuffled papers with the bored confidence of people who think they've already won. The bailiff called the session to order. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, adjusted her glasses. Cole versus Cole, she announced. Parties present? Richard Cole for the defense, my ex-husband said smoothly. He didn't glance at me. Marion Cole, plaintiff, I answered. My voice didn't shake. Not anymore. The judge nodded. We'll proceed with opening statements. Richard stood. His voice filled the room, a practiced symphony of authority. Your Honor, this case is a misunderstanding. Mrs. Cole contributed some demo lines over a decade ago, which she voluntarily shared with my firm. Any claims of theft or misattribution are, frankly, delusional. We will show there is no credible evidence connecting her voice to our commercials. He sat. The courtroom murmured. I caught a reporter whispering, "She's finished." I rose slowly. Your Honor, I said, for 10 years I've been silent. Today I'm here not to argue, but to play you something. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. I gestured to Ava, who sat at the tech station with her laptop, the glass box beside her like a relic. She connected cables to the court's projector. On the big screen behind the bench, a spectrogram appeared. Blue and green lines pulsing across black. First, I said, this is my original recording from 2012. You'll hear my voice. Ava hit play. The room filled with a soft, steady voice. Justice speaks. No music, no reverb, just breath and truth. Next, I said, Cole and Partners 2015 commercial. The second file played. The same line, deeper, polished, branded. Justice speaks. At first, to untrained ears, it sounded different, colder, glossier. But on the screen, the two waveforms layered perfectly, blue over green, every peak and valley aligned. The AI's analysis stamp glowed in the corner. Match, 99.98%. Pitch shift plus 2%. The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Ava highlighted the fingerprint band at 235 Hz. This resonance is unique to Mrs. Person. Cole, she said. It persists regardless of pitch alterations. Scientific verification attached to the evidence. Richard's lead attorney stood. Gudgeon, Your Honor, this so-called analysis is speculative, unsupported. The judge held up a hand. Sit down, I've read the brief. Continue, Mrs. Cole. I faced the room. 10 years ago I recorded that line for my husband as a favor. He built an empire on it. And when the world asked whose voice said, "Justice speaks," he gave them another name. He made me doubt my own sound. I paused, scanning the benches. Neighbors, strangers, journalists. Even Ethan sat 2 rows back, his tie loose, eyes wide. They told you I was unstable. That I was obsessed, I continued, like. But this is not obsession. This is a fingerprint. This is theft made visible. Richard finally rose, his composure cracking. Your Honor, this is an ambush. She's taken private material. I cut him off. My voice echoed louder than his. Private material? It's my voice. He glared at me, the mask slipping. You'll regret this. I stepped closer to the witness stand. For 10 years I regretted staying silent. That ends today. Ava cued the final file. My new recording from last week. This time, justice really speaks. The 3 files, original, commercial, new, played in sequence. The resonance lit up the screen like a heartbeat. Past, stolen, present. Aligning into one undeniable pattern. Even to untrained ears, the truth was audible now. Reporters' heads turned from Richard to me, pens scratching. The murmurs rose. It's her voice. It's really her. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Cole, do you dispute that this analysis shows your commercials used Mrs. This? Cole's voice without credit? Richard opened his mouth, then shut it. His attorney whispered furiously in his ear. The courtroom camera lights clicked on like tiny thunderclaps. I spoke into the microphone, slow and deliberate. Mr. Cole, you could steal my work, take my savings. You could even convince me to doubt myself. But you cannot steal the frequency of my soul. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, she said it. The phrase I'd rehearsed alone in the basement now rang through marble and microphones. Richard tried to rise again, but the judge's gavel cracked down. Enough, she said. The evidence speaks for itself. In the hush that followed, every sound magnified. The shuffling of a bailiff's shoes, the hiss of the projector cooling, the thud of my own heart. I felt the weight of 10 years lift, not all at once, but like a long exhale. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Cole, you may step down. I looked at Richard one last time. He wasn't the man who had once kissed my forehead. He was just a voice actor caught lip-syncing to a truth he didn't own. As I walked back to my seat, the courtroom erupted, cameras flashing, journalists scrambling for quotes. But under it all, a deeper silence spread, the kind that follows a dropped mask. "Oh," Ava squeezed my hand. "You did it." "No," I said softly, eyes still on the screen where my waveforms glowed like constellations. "The voice did." The judge raised her gavel again, the sound sharp and final. "Court will recess. We'll reconvene for verdict." The hammer echoed off the high ceiling. Light from the tall windows spilled across my face, warm and almost golden. The same light that used to slip into the studio at dawn. For a heartbeat, the courtroom faded. I wasn't sitting at a plaintiff's table anymore. I was back in my studio, headphones on, recording the rain with a 6-year-old boy, believing that sound could catch honesty before it disappeared. And maybe, I thought, it just had. You can steal credit, you can steal money, but you can't steal the frequency of a soul. The words rang in my head long after the gavel's echo died. And for the first time in a decade, the sound inside me was clear. The day after the verdict, Boston felt strangely quiet, like the city itself had turned down its volume. No reporters camped outside my gate. No emails. Even the phone, which had been vibrating nonstop for weeks, sat still, as if exhausted by the noise it helped create. I didn't celebrate. I just packed my bag and drove to the old studio on Porter Street, the one where I'd first whispered, "Justice speaks," into a microphone 13 years ago. The key stuck a little in the rusted lock. Inside, the air smelled of wood, dust, and faint electricity. The foam panels still clung to the walls like the memory of sound. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a soft percussion warming up. I set my recorder and the glass box on the desk. The reel inside glinted under the weak light filtering through the blinds. Outside, rain began to fall. Slow, deliberate drops striking the roof in sync, like nature running a metronome. I pressed play, the tape spun, and there it was again. My own voice, younger, steady, unbroken by years of erasure. Justice speaks. The line floated through the room, gentler than I remembered. Not triumphant, not angry, just true. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For the first time, I could hear everything that had been buried beneath it. The faint hiss of air conditioning, the soft click of the stop button, even the whisper of my breath. All those years, I thought silence meant nothingness. Now I understood. Silence was just the world waiting for the right pitch. Rain outside thickened. It hit the window in uneven patterns, an old rhythm coming home. I laughed quietly. "You came back," I whispered to the storm. "You never miss an encore, do you?" On the desk, the spectrogram printouts lay stacked neatly. Blue and green waves frozen mid-song. They looked almost peaceful now, like heartbeats that had finally found a resting tempo. I took off my shoes, walked barefoot across the cold floor, and turned on the old studio mic one last time. Its red light flickered, uncertain, but then steadied, a heartbeat finding courage. I leaned in. "It's over," I said softly. "Oh, now justice really does speak." The mic captured it all. The tremor, the exhale, the quiet smile at the end. No one else would hear this version. It wasn't for court or headlines. It was for me. When I stopped the recording, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt tuned, balanced, in key. I looked at the glass box, at the reel inside, the relic of both my pain and my proof. It caught the reflection of the stormlight, turning the room silver. I touched the surface gently. "You've done your job," I whispered. "Now rest." I left the tape playing softly in the background as I packed up the cables, wiping dust from each piece of equipment. Every sound, the zip of the bag, the creak of the floor, the whisper of fabric, seemed louder than usual. Sharper, alive. Maybe it was me who'd changed, not the room. When I reached the door, I turned for one last look. The mic still glowed, faint red in the dark. Rain pattered harder against the glass, syncopated and wild, a rhythm I'd chased my whole life. I smiled, not the polite smile of survival. The kind that comes when a long note finally resolves after years of dissonance. 10 years of silence, I murmured, all for 1 second that finally hit the right key. And outside, the thunder answered, low, full, and perfectly in tune. 1 year later, the studio was alive again. Not the old one on Porter Street, that had become a historical footnote, the place where a voice once reclaimed itself. This one was smaller, sunlit, tucked inside a converted library near Cambridge. The walls were lined with recycled wood and soft foam panels shaped like waves. A handmade sign at the entrance read, "Sound of Truth, a workshop for women who want to be heard." The first day I opened registration, 12 women showed up. They came with different accents, different heartbreaks, a teacher who'd been silenced by her school board, a widow who wanted to record bedtime stories for her grandkids, a woman in her 70s who'd never once heard her own voice play back. I didn't ask for their stories right away. We started simple, with sound. I taught them to breathe into a microphone, to catch that fragile moment when voice meets air. To listen to themselves, not for vanity, but for evidence that they existed. On the wall behind me hung a glass box. Inside it, the old tape reel from Justice Speaks. The ribbon no longer moved, but it shimmered when sunlight touched it, like a heartbeat resting between notes. That became our logo, a reminder that even silence can have texture if you listen close enough. Every class began the same way. I'd say, "You don't need a perfect voice. You just need one that belongs to you." And then I'd press record. Sometimes, between lessons, I'd catch myself watching them. The way they leaned forward when they spoke into the mic, the small tremors of fear giving way to pride. It was like watching color return to a photograph. They reminded me of myself, each woman fighting her own distortion, learning to tune back into her natural frequency. One afternoon, after class, a young woman lingered by the console. Her name was Jada, 25, a single mother who'd been fired for recording her boss's harassment. She ran her fingers along the dials as if touching something sacred. "Miss Marion," she said softly. "Can I ask something?" "Of course," she hesitated, then, "Do you hate your voice now?" After everything that happened. I looked at her, surprised by the question's tenderness. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the computer fan. Outside, rain tapped gently on the windows, the same rhythm that had followed me all my life. I smiled. "No, Jada, I don't hate it." "Then how did you forgive it? After it was used against you?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "I didn't have to forgive my voice," I said finally. "I just had to stop letting other people edit it." She nodded, eyes glistening, and pressed record. Her voice filled the room. Shaky, honest, alive. It was the sound of someone daring to exist out loud. At night, when everyone left, I stayed behind to clean the mics and rewind the day's recordings. The studio glowed with low amber light, cables looping across the floor like veins. I'd listen to snippets from each student. Laughter, pauses, confessions. They sounded like music. I realized I no longer feared sound. For years, I had associated it with exposure, with being twisted or stolen. Now, it felt like breath. Necessary, shared, human. On one wall, above the glass reel, I hung a quote written in white paint. "Silence doesn't kill anyone, unless you let someone else write the subtitles." The women laughed when they first saw it. But every time a new student hesitated to speak, they'd look up at the wall, take a breath, and begin. One evening, near closing time, Ethan came by. We hadn't spoken much since the trial. He stood in the doorway, older somehow, the edges of his confidence softened. "Nice place," he said quietly. "Thanks. Want to see the booth?" He nodded. I led him to the small recording corner where the mic hung suspended like a silver pendulum. He touched the headphones gently. "Still the same brand? Still the same pair," I said. "Well, they outlived everything else." He smiled faintly. "I listened to your interview on NPR," he said. "You sounded free." I laughed. "That's what happens when you stop whispering." He looked at the reel on the wall. "Dad's firm got bought out last month," he said. "They changed the slogan." "What is it now?" He hesitated. Truth speaks for all. They say it's inspired by you." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Maybe both." "Funny," I said. It only took them a decade to learn the harmony. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "I found this while cleaning Dad's office. It's labeled Justice Original, 2012. I thought you might want it." I took it, feeling its light weight in my palm. Another ghost of the past, now harmless. "Thank you," I said. "You're part of this frequency too, you know." He smiled, the same boy who once recorded thunderstorms with me. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't broken, it was understood. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the studio and played the file he'd given me. The tape hissed once, then cleared. "Justice Speaks," my younger self whispered, her voice thinner but still alive. Then, faintly over the background, came a second sound. A child's laughter. Ethan's. From that day we recorded the rain. I closed my eyes. The years folded in on themselves. Loss, betrayal, trial, freedom, all condensed into that single tone of recognition. The pitch was perfect. I stopped the playback and looked up at the reel gleaming in the dark. For the first time, I understood what freedom actually sounds like. Not applause, not validation, just the clean, steady hum of truth, vibrating without interference. Now, every Monday, I begin my class with a new ritual. We sit in a circle, each woman holding a small recorder. I tell them, "This is your story. Speak it once, clearly. Even if no one listens, the air will remember." Then we press record together. A dozen red lights blink in unison, little heartbeats of courage. And one by one, the women speak. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they laugh halfway through their stories. Sometimes they just breathe. Long, trembling breaths that sound like the start of a song. When the session ends, we play it back. No edits, no filters. Just truth. Each time the sound fills the room differently, deeper, fuller, freer. It's not about me anymore. It never was. But when they ask why I still keep that old tape on the wall, I tell them the truth. Because it reminds me that even distortion can be undone. You can bend a note, but you can't erase its source. And when one of them inevitably asks, "Do you ever miss the silence?" I smile. No, I've learned silence isn't peace. It's just an empty track waiting for a new voice. That night, as I lock up, the studio hums softly. Computers cooling, mics settling, the faint electric sigh of a place still awake. Outside, rain begins again, tapping the windows like applause that finally found its timing. I look once more at the reel in the glass case. It catches the streetlight, gleaming like a coin flipped by fate, and landing, finally, on my side. I whisper to it before turning off the lights. Silence never killed anyone, unless we let someone else write the subtitles for us. And with that, I close the door, leaving the microphones. And the truth. Still on record. The camera light turns red. I take a slow breath. The same sound that once betrayed me now marks the beginning of my own show. Sound of Truth. Episode 1. In front of me, the microphone gleams under the soft ring light. Behind it, the glass case catches a faint reflection. The old tape reel, still and silver. I don't script this part. I just speak. If one day, I begin, you hear someone telling your story in a voice that sounds almost like yours, I pause, letting the silence stretch just enough for the listener to lean in. Ask one question. Whose heart is that microphone plugged into? My voice doesn't tremble this time. It fills the small studio, low and warm. Not performance, but presence. Outside, rain brushes against the windows again. It always seems to find me when I need rhythm. Echo. I smile at the sound. The audience can't see it, but they'll hear it. That tiny smile vibrating between words. I spent 10 years thinking silence would keep the peace, I continue. It didn't. Silence is just a story paused at the wrong moment. The world kept playing. I was the only one on mute. I glance at the waveform on my screen. Every pulse of my voice glowing steady and alive. Once, those peaks terrified me. Now, they look like proof of survival. If you've ever been edited out of your own life, if someone's ever told your story louder than you could, this is for you. Because truth doesn't die. It just waits for someone brave enough to hit records again. The word record lands softly but carries weight. I can almost feel thousands of women out there listening. Maybe in kitchens, maybe in parked cars, maybe in the same kind of quiet I once mistook for safety. I lean closer to the mic, lowering my voice until it's almost a whisper. You don't have to shout. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to make a sound that belongs to you. A pause. Then, the faintest background hum. The old reel playing in the glass box, almost inaudible but real. This story began with a stolen voice, I say, and ends with an echo returned to its source. I press a button, and Ava's mix cues underneath. A simple ambient track built from real rain and heartbeats. No melody, just the natural rhythm of truth breathing. So share this, I say softly, not for me, but for the woman who still thinks she's too late to start over. Share it for the person who's been told their voice is too small, too shaky, too wrong. Share it. Because truth isn't fragile, it's just waiting to be heard again. The waveform peaks gently. A perfect curve. I look into the camera, straight at whoever's on the other side of the screen. The truth is not lost. Vietnamese. Letting the bilingual notes stay in the final cut. It doesn't vanish. It only waits for someone brave enough to turn the mic back on. I let the silence breathe for 3 full seconds, an eternity in broadcast time. Then, I smile. This is where my story ends. But maybe. I glance at the blinking red light. This is the first recording of your freedom. The rain outside hits harder, perfectly on cue. I reach forward, fingers steady, and press stop. The red light fades. The silence that follows isn't empty. It hums. The sound of something finally complete.